Able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so today we're going to be talking about how to efficiently and effectively read scientific papers. Before we jump into that, I just want to hear from you all. I think it's been like a couple weeks that you all have been in your research project. So I just want a few people, if they want to share, let me know how it's been going so far. So you can share like one thing that's been exciting or that you've been enjoying, and then one challenge that you've had. Let's see. Noah, do you mind sharing?
Sure. I guess one exciting thing is that I got to meet with like all the other med students in the lab and talk with them about their experiences, and they'll be attempting to teach me like certain lab techniques somehow virtually. And then I guess one challenging thing is like I have a project that I'm working on, and I guess I tend to overthink things. And so my mentor's been telling me it's not as complicated as I'm making it seem to be. So I guess that's my challenging thing.
Okay, makes sense. Anyone else wants to share? Just maybe like two more volunteers.
I'll something exciting is, I guess, well, from working at school in the lab, I feel like I was unable to like communicate with my mentor as much and as effectively. So being online, I feel like I have better reach of her and I can communicate with her more often, and I'm getting a better understanding of what we're doing. And then I guess a challenge would be like balancing my summer research with my other summer programs that I'm in, and then the classes that I'm taking over this summer. It's just kind of like I have to organize my time better.
Okay, so you have a pretty full slate of like virtual research programs and classes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, we have one more person. Go ahead.
I guess I can go. An exciting thing that I'm working on is like a website for my research tour for a project I'm going to make. I
Nice.
never made one before, so that's like fun and it's something to do. And then additionally, like I guess would be my challenge is like I'm reading a lot of articles for literature review, but sometimes they're like really sciencey and like hard to get through. And I feel like it should not take me as long to read them. So hopefully this will be helpful.
Great. Yeah, so I do. I hope that let me know how it's been going so far. So you can share like one thing that's been exciting or that you've been enjoying, and then one challenge that you've had. Let's see. Noah, do you mind sharing?
Sure. I guess one exciting thing is that I got to meet with like all the other med students in the lab and talk with them about their experiences, and they'll be attempting to teach me like certain lab techniques somehow virtually. And then I guess one challenging thing is like I have a project that I'm working on, and I guess I tend to overthink things. And so my mentor's been telling me it's not as complicated as I'm making it seem to be. So I guess that's my challenging thing.
Okay. Makes sense. Anyone else wants to share? Just maybe like two more volunteers.
I'll go. Something exciting is, I guess, well, from working at school in the lab, I feel like I was unable to like communicate with my mentor as much and as effectively. So being online, I feel like I have better reach of her and I can communicate with her more often, and I'm getting a better understanding of what we're doing. And then I guess a challenge would be like balancing my summer research with my other summer programs that I'm in, and then the classes that I'm taking over this summer. It's just kind of like I have to organize my time better.
Okay, so you have a pretty full slate of like virtual research programs and classes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, we had one more person. Go ahead.
I guess I can go. An exciting thing that I'm working on is like a website for my research tour for a project I'm going to make. I
Nice.
never made one before, so that's like fun and it's something to do. And then additionally, like I guess would be my challenge is like I'm reading a lot of articles for literature review, but some things are like really sciencey and like hard to get through, and I feel like it should not take me as long to read them. So hopefully, this will be helpful.
Great. Yeah, so I hope that some of what we're going to talk about today you can actually apply as you're reading your papers. But the quick answer is it does take a while. That if it's taking you a long time to get through papers, that is normal. So just keep that in mind. Thank you all
Okay.
for sharing. One quick, so actually I wanted to, who was it that spoke first about their challenge with overthinking?
That
Was
was
there one challenge? Noah.
yeah.
So Noah, do you have any thoughts about how you can sort of take a step back and not overthink your research project? This is
I
something
think
that I tend to do a lot as well. Go ahead.
it was just a matter of me like overcomplicating the directions I was given.
Okay.
I think that since I thought the directions were too simple, that I was supposed to be doing more,
Got you.
but in reality, I wasn't.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Good, good. So you're able to know why you were overthinking and where specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. All right, so we're going to jump in to the talk. So I'm really excited about this talk. As you all, continue with your undergrad research, get into grad school, this is one of those foundational skills that you will, even in your coursework as well, that you will always use. And maybe I can't remember if when I was an undergrad, if I had a actual talk or workshop on how to read papers, but it's more complicated than I think we realize, and it's useful to actually get some very specific tips and strategies on how to read it, because it's just that it's a skill. It's not just like, passive reading or leisure reading. It's very it can be very technical. So I hope that this presentation will help you all, as I know that you're reading a lot of scientific papers. So I'm going to share about 5 steps that you should follow as you're reading papers, and then we're going to talk about a couple of bonus steps. As always, this can be, I want this to be interactive. I'll ask for you all to answer questions or, share things, but you can always feel free to stop me at any time if there's something that you have a question on, or even like a very specific challenge or something that you're experiencing that's related to the topic. Okay, so the first, one second, it's on. Okay, so the first step is establishing your goal. So I want everyone to just think about what are reasons that you're even reading scientific literature and annotate it on the screen. Does everyone know how to write on the screen?
No.
No, okay. So can you all see my screen, like this menu up here at the top? You may not see it. Where it says mute, stop video, you all don't see that, correct?
Yeah, we don't.
No.
Okay. So I think it's under your, if you click at the top, actually, let me stop share for 1 second. Okay, we're gonna skip that because I'm not seeing the option. It's usually a little button at the top. Just type in the chat, if you don't mind, what are some reasons that you would read any type of scientific or research literature? So I'll give you a couple minutes to type that in. You can also come off mute and share if you would like. Okay, so I see Hyatt says to get background understanding of the kind of research your lab is doing. Okay, so it's kind of to get just like a background introduction of like the concepts that you're going to be learning or that's involved in your research, to understand the purpose behind completing the research. So what are some other reasons? So outside of getting background or understanding the context of where your research fits in the field, what's some other things, some other goals or other reasons that you'd read a scientific paper or literature? Okay, Jaya says to get an idea of the success and failures of research studies similar to your own / help from your own projects. Okay. So it's almost like seeing what worked for their research project, or whatever their study was, and seeing if you can apply it to your research project, or maybe you see certain holes in their research design and you're going to pull something that they didn't do or something that failed from their paper and apply it to yours to make sure your research project is authentic. That's a really good point. So making sure that you're not doing something that's already been done, right? So it's just really getting that background or understanding of what has already been studied related to your project. That's a really good point. Okay, these are all very true, right? These are many reasons. One other reason I would add is you may read a paper specifically for a method or a technique. So some of you may be, if you're in like a biology lab, you may be doing Western blotting, or you may be working with certain software to analyze your data. So you may actually read a paper that is solely based that talks about the method, or that may be a method development paper, or you may read a paper that actually has a research question that they were answering, but you really only care about the method in which they answer that question because that's going to be useful to your research. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the reason that, I have this as the first step, because for every paper that you read, the goal may not always be the same. So right now in your research project, the first couple weeks, you probably will spend a lot of time getting background understanding of the research. So you may, your advisor may have just given you a lot of papers so that you can understand the field or whatever area you're studying in. But even if that is the case, I want you to try to think about very specifically, why am I reading this paper? Do I want to understand the background about concept one? Or do I want to understand how to design, how to actually develop a research design? Or do I just want to know how they use this one method and applied it to this research question? All right, so that's our first step, establishing our goal or reason for reading the paper. Step one is figuring out where what's a good place for you to actually read a paper. It does involve a lot of mental energy, and depending on the paper that you're reading, if it's really tedious or it's a lot of jargon that you don't understand, your environment has a huge impact on how successful you will be with reading the paper. So can someone share, like, if they already know that I read best in this location, what are some spots or places that you feel that are that's very productive for you while reading papers?
I can answer that question.
Go ahead. Sorry,
Sorry.
we have two people. Go ahead, Victoria.
My favorite place to read the papers are really at my desk because it keeps me like alert and awake, and I get to have like a flat surface so I can write and take notes on if I need to.
Nice. Someone else wants to share?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, it's not a lot of places we can go right now. So I just go like outside, out of my house or out of my room. Like, I go out on my back porch and read, or like to the park and read.
Nice. Outside or in the park? Excellent. I love that. It's same here. So just keep this in mind. And if you don't know, that's okay. Try an experiment, right? Try reading the paper in different locations. And I found for me that it depends on the type of paper. If I'm just kind of reading a paper to get a background understanding and I'm going to pretty much breeze through it a little quicker, then I can have like music playing in the background. I may even be able to read in like a coffee shop or a cafe area or outside on my patio. If it's something that requires more focus and there's a lot of jargon and I really need to dissect each of the figures and really understand the paper in its totality, then I may need a little more quiet environment, right? I may actually need to be in like an office or in my home or just in a space where it's not a lot of people or a lot of extra noise. So I've attached this link here, which is just an article where we talk about thinking about your environment. And this is just good in general as it pertains to reading a paper or just thinking about whatever task you're working on. Where do I work best? And a lot of times we just work at our desk or in the library because that's standard, but I do encourage you to kind of play around with this so you can figure out what environment you need to be in when you're reading a paper so that it can help, boost your productivity. Okay, so the next step is to set a time limit. So it is normal for it to take you a few hours to get through a paper, depending on where your knowledge level is of the paper, how long the paper is, how many figures. If there's like 10 figures and they've done like 10 different techniques, it is normal to take a couple of hours. I mean, there are some papers that I spend days on because I may read for 3 to 4 hours or 2 hours, and then the next day I'll continue reading the paper. So if you feel that it's taking you a long time to get through a paper, just understand and know that is normal, right? It shouldn't be just, I should be able to read this paper in an hour. That's not necessarily always the case. And more times than not, it's not the case, especially if you're actually retaining the information or getting whatever you want from the paper. So one of the suggestions that I have here is to, one, take breaks. Don't try to sit down and read a paper from start to finish. Actually read in small intervals, like 25 minutes. Has anyone ever heard of the Pomodoro app?
Pomodoro?
Yes, thank you. I don't know why I can't talk today. So yeah, has anyone ever heard of that?
Yes.
Okay, have you used it before, Victoria?
Yeah, I used to use it a lot senior year of high school.
Okay. And did you find it useful or?
Yeah, it really kept me on track and like kept me to keep working because sometimes I'd want to take a break for longer than like 5 minutes, but the timer really just keeps you on track.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I love this technique, it's basic because when you're working or when you're reading your paper, you only have to think about it in a 25-minute chunk, right? And for some reason, if you tackle a paper that's 15 pages long and you think about, okay, let me just read for the next 25 minutes, it's not as mentally, it doesn't feel as daunting because you're thinking about it in small chunks. And it helps to focus you. So that means you're just reading for that 25 minutes. You're not checking social media. You're not checking your phone. You're not getting distracted with other research tasks. So that's just one suggestion. You may find that you read best for 40 minutes straight with a 10-minute break. So the way the Pomodoro technique works is it's an app that you can download to your phone. And for 25 minutes, you work, and then it alerts you when you have a break, and the breaks are 5 minutes. And then I think it's when you've done 4 or 5 25-minute 5-minute break sessions that you get a longer break of like 15 minutes, for example. So I encourage, using that, or just setting some time limit where you're reading in small chunks and then taking like a quick 5-minute break. When you're reading, it should take you approximately 5 to 10 minutes per paragraph. And this also varies depending on your knowledge of the subject matter, right? You may read the first paragraph and have to Google a lot of terms or do some background information so that you can understand the paragraph. So that's why you want to take that time to do whatever background research you need to do so that you can make sure you understand each paragraph. And then for the figures, it can take, I would allot about 20 minutes to really dissect a figure and make sure that you understand, to read the text associated with the figure, and then go to the figure, read the caption, and really understand the figure.
How long did you say for the figure? I'm sorry.
So no worries. About 20 minutes. About 20 minutes for a figure. This varies, right? This is just approximate if it's a figure that you really need to dissect in detail, but sometimes it depends on the paper. And some figures, if it's like an introduction figure or a figure for like that summarizing the paper, that it may not take as long, but typically 20 minutes is a good amount of time for you to make sure you really understand the figure. Okay, so the next step is dissecting the figures. So when you're dissecting the figures, right, and this is really like the meat of the paper. If you understand the figures, you pretty much, know that you understand the paper. So here you want to use like metacognitive strategies. And what I mean is just, as you're looking through the figure in detail, you want to be asking yourself, what are your thoughts? Are you thinking, oh, this is a really interesting way that they've presented the data, or I'm completely confused, I don't know what any of this means. Just going through understanding all the axes. So it's really like, and you want to actually note take this, like you want to write down what your thoughts are as you're going through the figure. So you want to make a note of what you understand from each part of the figure, what you understand as the main takeaway from the figure, and then also what are things that aren't clear to you, what you're confused on. If you're not understanding how they're drawing this conclusion based on how the data is represented, you want to make a note of that as well. Does that make sense? Or what are people's thoughts about that?
I think it makes sense.
Okay. Are some of you already doing this? Like when you're going through a figure, are you already writing down what makes sense and why, or where you're lost or what's confusing?
I usually don't take that many like notes on figures, so I will do this like now. But like I said, it usually takes me like a long time, and I was like thinking that it should not take as long, so I wouldn't take as many notes or anything. But now like go back and use more time.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay, great. So that we can keep moving. Okay, so the next step is about organizing both your papers, your research papers or journal articles, and the notes that you take. Especially as the summer continues or your research projects continue, because you'll find that the stack of papers will just keep increasing, and you want to have a good way to organize both your papers and the notes. So these are a couple of different apps here, Trello and EndNote are ways to organize projects or your notes. Mendeley and EndNote are ways to organize papers. So I used EndNote in grad school to kind of keep, when I was writing my thesis, to keep all of my papers organized. And I'll show you an example. Okay. So what I like about EndNote is for your groups, you can come up with like, you can organize your papers by topics. So my research was on cancer. So any background papers that I read that talked about just how cancer forms, what we understand about cancer, essentially what was for my introduction section, I put all those papers in that group, cancer. And then MD, which is just molecular dynamics, that was a specific technique that I used in my research. So anything about method development around MD is where those papers went. And then P53 was a specific protein that I was studying. And so any background information about P53, or even just research studies that were done as it pertains to P53, that's where those papers went. And the same with protein kinases, another protein class, I put them there. So then when I'm writing and I'm like, oh, I recall this paper where they did X, Y, and Z, I have it organized by categories so I can quickly go to that category. And then they typically will organize it based on alphabetical order of the author. You can also do a search based on the title, but so you may remember different things. Like I remember the author, or I remember some keyword in the title, but it's just a nice way to organize your papers. And then OneNote. So this is what I use for taking notes on my papers. So I will, in OneNote, you can have a section. So you can, develop or title your sections based on, it could be based on papers that are about the method development versus papers that are background about whatever you're studying or the research field that you're in. And then each page can be each paper that you read, and then you can actually type your notes here. So it's really like a notebook that's electronic. So I really like to use this, for example. But there are tons of different software or apps out there that you can explore for organizing your notes and papers. So I would just encourage you to do that early on so that you're not wasting time trying to find a paper or remember what notes that you wrote. And it's a really good way because when you come back to that paper that you may have read months ago, you can quickly go to your notes and now you have a gist of what you've read. You don't have to necessarily reread the paper. All right, so for the next step, you want to think about what are new hypotheses that can be generated from the data. Ideally, you can do this for every figure. So every figure that's presented in the paper, they have a conclusion that they're drawing or some main takeaway message. But you want to think about what's a new question that comes from that data. If you don't do it for every figure, at least for the entire paper. So as you go through all the figures, you read the entire paper, think about what is some new hypothesis that can be asked? And this is just really testing your application of the paper. So, you know, really testing to see if you really understood what the paper, understood all the aspects of the paper. And then now you're taking it a step further to apply it to see, okay, this is another question that I can potentially ask based on the data that was presented in this paper. You may not do this for every single paper that you read, but the papers where these are really key to your research projects, like maybe you're using the same research design, or the knowledge that they've generated is really the foundation of your research, you may want to try this. Any questions about this step? Okay, I'll keep moving along. Okay, so this is going along with the whole testing your application of the paper. A bonus step, so these are just, I'm gonna, talk about 2 additional steps that aren't really necessary in reading the paper, but just something that I think would be beneficial to test your understanding and application of the paper, is rewriting the abstract in your own words. And you will find that doing this, so at first I used to like write a brief summary in my own words of what the paper is about before I read it. So just based on reading the abstract, I would kind of summarize it in my own words. And then after reading the paper, you will find that you might even like rewrite it or re-summarize it in a completely different way because you now understand it in a deeper way. So this is another way just to make sure that you really understand the key takeaway message from the paper. What question were they asking? What was their answer to that question, and how did they arrive at that answer? Those are pretty much like the 3 points that you want to quickly summarize as you rewrite the abstract.
Can you repeat those, please?
No problem. So the first question is, what question were they asking? The second question is, what answer did they provide, or what answer did they come up with based on the data presented? And then the third point is, how did they answer that question? So now you're basically getting into the research design, what the method.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so then the extra bonus step is creating a summary figure, right? So if you, after reading the paper, going through all their figures, if you had to summarize this paper in a picture, and this may really relate to those of you that are visual learners, to come up with a summary figure. Some papers already have a summary figure. Even if they do, I would rework or create a new summary figure to just summarize the paper. And again, for these bonus steps, you definitely want to do this for the papers where it's important that you understand the paper in its totality. If there's a paper that you're reading and you just quickly want to understand a method, so you just want to like really go to the methods section and see what reagents they use or a script they use, just something, if you're doing like computational work, something very specific, you may not need to go through all of this. But if you have a paper where you really need to understand every aspect of the paper, that's where these bonus steps will definitely come into play in helping you test and make sure that you understand the paper. All right, you all. So we have moved along quite fast here. All right, so I will transfer these to the slide, but the key takeaway here, and I have it as it pertains to reading and writing science because those typically go hand in hand, is, if you're feeling stuck, change your location. Your location, if you find that like I'm always falling asleep while reading a paper, that was definitely the case for me. I noticed that sometimes I have to stand. Like, actually, I have a standing desk in my office. That's how I work now. But I started doing that while reading because if I sat on a comfortable chair or on a comfortable couch, I would fall asleep 30 minutes into reading the paper. So, making that change in location or tweaking, maybe you need some type of like non-verbal music playing in the background to just kind of motivate you or stimulate those creative juices. Find an incentive that works for you. So you may even say, okay, if I get through this much of the paper, I'll reward myself with X, right? Which can be really important because reading papers it's super important, but it's like the most challenging thing that a lot of scientists struggle with because we're so focused on generating data that we forget to spend as much time reading the literature. So you want to find ways to incentivize reading. Take a break and do something else. I would strongly encourage not sitting there for hours and trying to power through a paper. It's a better use of your time if you spend 3 hours and you've read 3 pages of the paper, but you understood it, you've dissected those figures, you've made good notes, and then take a break, or you say, I'll finish it the next day. Or it may take you a week getting through a paper. That's a better use of your time as opposed to trying to sit there and power through. Find an accountability buddy or buddy. So I don't know how much you all interact with each other outside of these seminars, but I would encourage you to work together to come up with accountability around reading papers. So if it's, I need to read a paper a day or 3 papers a week, set these goals with an accountability partner and also let them know these are the times where I should be reading a paper. So you all can do a quick check-in, like, all right, it's 1 p.m. We're supposed to be reading from 1 to 3 p.m. All right. And I'll text you at 3 to let you know, to give a quick update to each other about what you accomplished, if you've read the paper or where you are in reading. Also, schedule time for reading a paper. And this is something that I struggle with even now, and I have to remind myself, because if it's not in my schedule, you won't read a paper. So putting it in your calendar or in your action items or however you organize your tasks that need to be completed for the day and for the week, you want to put in when you're going to read. And these are just some other articles that talk about, how to effectively read science as well as write science. And I know we have a couple of people that are actually trying to write or publish this summer, but even with RISE, I'm sure you all have to write up something and you will be writing science throughout your time doing research. So I'm going to include both of these links in the chat. And yeah, so now is the time for you all to ask as many questions. So we got through the presentation quite quickly, so we can spend a lot of time answering questions or just discussing very specific challenges that you all have.
Earlier you mentioned that reading articles was a skill. So I guess my question would be, the more you read, did it get easier or did you get faster or anything like that?
That's a good question. It does get easier with the more that you read, but it really depends on the topic. So even now, my background is in chemistry and computational chemistry. So if I have to go back and read a biology paper that's really, really biology heavy, it's still going to take me a significant amount of time to get through it, just because I'm not familiar with, doing all these different biology techniques. However, I have developed those skills with quickly identifying what I don't know, right? That's the best skill you can identify, is reading a paragraph and saying, okay, I'm lost and I know exactly where I'm lost, so I know how to go about getting those questions answered. So absolutely, the more that you read, the more knowledgeable you're going to become in the field, and just you're going to just have a better routine and groove as it pertains to reading papers. And then you can apply that to any papers that you're reading, even if it's not in your research field, or even if it's not, they're talking about methods that you've never seen before, you will still be able to apply it. Absolutely. All right, so I've put in it's 2 references that I've just typed in the chat for reading science, and now I'm going to copy over the 2 for writing. Any other questions, or even just thoughts, discussion? How has it been so far with reading papers? What are techniques that people have been using, right? I shared a couple of different ways to like organize your notes and papers, but maybe you all have some other techniques that you use. You all are much more quieter today compared to the first one. Maybe because it's Monday. Okay, so I have a question for you all. What is one main takeaway that you gathered from today that you're going to apply starting now when you're reading your papers?
I would say to not try to force yourself to like try to power through it. Instead, like if you realize that your brain is not doing you justice at the moment, to just come back to it. And that would be a much more effective use of time.
Exactly. It's about quality versus quantity. So you don't want to just power through it and just read a lot of papers.
The takeaway for me would be
the Pomodoro method. I never heard of that, and I think that would be really helpful for me, just because like I don't have the longest attention span, and after about like 25 minutes, I probably get tired of reading an article. So I'm gonna try that out and see if it helps.
Okay. Good deal.
Yeah, me as well. I think I'll start using the Pomodoro method because I find there's a lot of resistance when I think about starting a new research paper or just continuing reading the research paper. I just find there's a lot of resistance going into it, and I'm just like in my head, it's much worse than it actually is. And so
Yeah.
if I think about it for just doing it for 25 minutes, just starting out, then it's easier to get into it. And so that was my question. Like, do you have any advice basically for doing like the parts that you don't want to do? Like, do you have any advice for like getting started or getting into like the flow of things and how to like initiate that and not have so much resistance going into it?
So give me an example. Do you mean like resistance about getting through like a figure, or you just mean like reading or any research task in general?
Really any research task in general, I think it could apply. Just like the feeling you get when like before you're about to start studying or something and you know that there's a lot you don't know, you know, you have to be really focused for a long period of time, and in your head it's much worse than it actually is in reality. So do you have any advice on that?
Got you. That's a really good question. So the first thing is doing something that will help just kind of center you, especially if you feel anxious. So anxiety, I know for me, anxiety is definitely something that I have struggled with like throughout my academic career and even now. And so I will do like meditation or listen to some type of like calming, meditating music before I get started, just to kind of like lower the anxiety of feeling like, oh man, there's like so much I have to do. I just open my email and there's like 30 tasks that people have emailed me, right? So for you, it may feel like, like this is, you know, it's an uphill battle. There's so much I don't understand. So just doing something that will calm you, like even just taking deep breaths for a minute and focusing only on the breath, these things really do work, right? So first I would try that. And then for so there's two different strategies. You can tackle, and I've read arguments for both of these. Sometimes they suggest tackling the most dreadful or the most challenging, we'll say challenging task first. So you can, like, at the start of your day, put that earlier on and divide it up into chunks. So this Pomodoro method that we talked about, you can apply this for everything, right? Not just reading a paper, but if there is some writing or some experiment or research task, so long as it's not, if you're in the lab doing an experiment, your experiment kind of dictates your time. But if you have the flexibility of time, thinking about it in small chunks, like I'm only going to work on this for 30 minutes and I'm going to do 3 30-minute time slots and I'm going to do a break in between, right? That may help to make the task seem less daunting. The other thing is you may do a task that is easier first, just to kind of get some momentum and build your confidence, and then go into a challenging task second. The third point I will make about that is start paying attention to when you're most productive. So for me, for example, after 3 p.m., like if I start doing work 7:30, 3 o'clock, my energy just starts to tank, right? So I can't do tasks that require a lot of mental brain power. So if you find, and reading papers, it even though you're just sitting there and you're just reading, it actually involves a lot of energy. So if you notice that your energy is most high at 10 a.m. or at 6 a.m., that's when I would put those types of tasks during that time where you have the most energy. And then as your energy starts to kind of tank or you get a little less focused, maybe you can put another task that doesn't require as much brain power there. But even in that, this is all trial and error. So don't be hard on yourself if you don't know these, and like if you don't know when you're most productive or when your energy is the highest. Start thinking about it and just try and get out, right? Like if you have no idea when you're most productive reading a paper, then try it. This week, try reading first thing in the morning as your first task. Then try it in the afternoon the next week, and then try it in the evenings. And then just kind of assess, like, oh, I found that it was most productive during this time. Does that make sense? I feel like that was a really long answer, but did that kind of address your question?
Yeah, that helped a lot, actually. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Great. So any other questions, or what's a main takeaway that you took that you are planning to start immediately? So let's see. I don't know if we've heard from Hyatt and Noah.
I guess the takeaway I took was to, when reading an article, to do it in chunks, because I'm used to just like reading the entire thing and then trying to go back and dissect pieces of it. So I guess if I do it like piece by piece from the beginning, it would be easier for me to understand.
Okay.
I would say same as Noah. Like I just will read for hours at a time and don't really take the time to break it up like I should. And I also like how you suggested mentally and OneNote, because right now I'm just writing all of my notes in one big Google Doc along with the papers.
Okay.
So yeah, I think I'm gonna start doing that.
Nice. Okay. Good deal. What are some challenges or things that you found that have worked for you when you're looking specifically at the figures? So I guess I'm trying to get more insight into how you all are dissecting the figures in the papers.
I guess I can say something. I usually look at like the caption and explaining what it means first before actually looking at the image and trying to figure out what was going on. Because a lot of the stuff I've been reading lately, just by looking at the image, I have no idea what it means. So I have to read the caption first and then go back and read like bits and pieces of the article to figure out what they did before fully understanding the image.
Okay, so you first go to the caption and then you kind of match what they're having the caption with what's on the figure, and then you go back to the text with what their like takeaway or conclusion was from the figure.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else?
I guess I would just say, well, I wouldn't say that I didn't ever really pay attention to the figures, but like, I felt like if I understood what I needed to understand from the words in the article, then I wouldn't pay as much attention to the figures if I didn't understand it. So, I guess a takeaway from this would be that I should pay more attention to the figures and dissect them because they have a lot of importance in the article.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Jaya, am I saying your name correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that, because I did the same thing even through a lot of grad school. Like I would just scan the figures quickly, but I mostly focused on the text. So I'm happy that you already are identifying or knowing that you do that, right? And that's okay if that is what you currently do. You just kind of read the paper. If you understand it, you keep it moving. The figures, so one of the ways, or I would say what one incentive for yourself in paying attention to the figures is the figures really give you ideas on how to present your own data, right? So when you have to give a talk or a poster for your research, you can think about some of these papers that you've read and you can think about how they presented the data. So that's one way, right? That's the name of the game, like getting ideas from other papers, not only just in the research design, but also just the way that they present the data, right? When you write up your paper, sometimes you may organize it based on the structure of another paper because you really just liked their sort of format and structure and like how they went from one idea to the next. So if you can think about it like that of, you know, another way to, in addition to just understanding the paper more in depth, also just to get ideas for how you will represent your own data. And then sometimes you will find, so as you keep doing this, you will sometimes find holes in the paper, or you'll look at the figure and say, how are they coming to this conclusion? Like when I'm looking at the figure, this is what I'm seeing, and there's a disconnect between what I'm seeing and what's in the text. And when that happens, that's why you want to make notes. You want to write that down. And as you continue to read, if you still have that question at the end, that's a great discussion when you next meet with your mentor, right? You can say, this is what I understood from reading the paper. In this paragraph, this is what they're concluding. This is what I got from the figure. I'm not understanding how they have shown this. So now your advisor can help you fill in that gap, right, of understanding the figure or just understanding the main takeaway from the paper. All right, any other thoughts, questions? Has anyone met with their, actually, yeah, since we have some extra time, have any of you, since our last time together, met with your advisor and had a conversation about where you've shared your goals and what you want to get out of the summer program, and you've also learned what their expectations are for you? Oh, yeah, I don't know. I was going to put you on the spot. So if you, even if you can just type in the chat, say yes or no. I'm really curious. So I really want to know if you all were able to have this conversation.
I met with my research mentor last Friday, I think, and I just talked to her about this, like the meeting we had, what was it, like 2 weeks ago or the week before that, whenever. And it was just really helpful to break the ice. And I just started talking to her more about like not totally related research stuff. so it was not as uncomfortable and stuff. And I'm looking forward to being with her again now instead of being as nervous about it.
Good, good. Excellent. All right, so Victoria has typed in the chat. Victoria, do you have do you have something on the schedule for your next meeting?
Yes, actually, tomorrow is our next meeting. We had the first one where you talked about we did talk about like expectation, or like I talked about what I wanted, but we just haven't had another meeting after that. We've only had one, and it wasn't super like detailed either. So I hope to discuss that more tomorrow when I meet with them.
Okay, so the meeting you all have, you did share very general what you wanted to get out of the summer, but not as detailed as you would have
Right.
liked. Okay, and did they share what their goals or expectations were for you during the summer?
They actually didn't know, now that I think about it.
Okay. Okay, great. So then tomorrow you can revisit and share more in detail, and then you can also ask questions about like what their expectations are.
Right.
Anyone else? So no, I guess the same question for you. Do you have something scheduled for your next meeting with your advisor?
Yeah, but we kind of talked about like both of our expectations before I started working with him. So I worked with him last year. So basically we just went over like the RISE contract so that he knew that I could get all my expectations that I needed to fulfill my RISE requirements, as well as everything I wanted to do by the end of the summer. So we kind of already had the conversation.
Okay. Good deal. And what was that like when you all had the conversation? Like how did you feel about the conversation?
I felt pretty good about it since like I had already been in his lab for 2 months last summer. So I already knew him. I felt like it would have been a lot more stressful and awkward if I was new to his lab. But since I wasn't, it was really easy to have that conversation.
Okay. I think Ayana and Hyatt, yep. Where are you all?
I mean, I think that we had already kind of talked to our mentor about goals and stuff before the last meeting that we had, but we've met again, and I feel like we pretty much know what we have planned to do and like what we want to do every week and like what the end goal is for the summer.
Okay, so you feel confident that your mentor knows like what you want to get from the summer, and you're very clear on what he or she's expectation is from you.
Yes, for me, yes. I'm not sure if Hayat feels the same way.
Say that one more time. I didn't hear the last part.
I said yes, for me, yes. I'm not sure if Hayat feels the same way, but
okay. Oh, so you and Hayat are in the same lab? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Hayat, do you want to share where you are on having that conversation, or if you have, or when your next meeting will be for you to discuss?
Yeah, sure. In the beginning, when I first met with Dr. Williams, I actually just was having like a conversation with her about my career interests and, you know, how to really figure out what it is exactly that I want to do. So we had the discussion a few weeks ago, but I think she has a pretty good understanding of my goals for this summer. I think so, yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. So some of us, we've had the conversation, others we may want to revisit it to just be more explicit and to make sure that both of you and your mentor are on the same page. And then others of us we have scheduled to discuss. Great. So you all, we have another session scheduled next Tuesday. I think it's about presenting, yes. But I purposely don't make the presentations take the entire hour because I want to allow a lot of time for discussion and questions that you all have in general. So even, you know, as a follow-up between now and next week, you may have read, will probably have at least read one paper, right? So I want to hear from you, like, what has worked, what hasn't worked. If you've met with your mentor, you've discussed things in more detail, you can feel free to share that during our next session, right? So even though I'm here and I'm speaking on these very particular topics, in general, like, I want to be an added support for you all so that you can be successful throughout your summer and get the most out of your summer research. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, I know I put you all on the spot today, but now you know for the next one that it's, this is what will happen. You'll have the opportunity to just kind of give some feedback on, how the knowledge that you're getting, how you're applying it, if you're applying it, why you aren't applying it, or why you are, and just letting me know what works so I can figure out how to tweak or maybe give some alternative suggestions that might be more useful. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
It sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for your attention and just for being engaged. This has been a lot of fun for me. I hope that you all got some really useful information. You can reach out with questions if you have them. And I will see you all next week. So enjoy the rest of your day and week.
Thank you.
Thank you too.
Thank you, Ms. Woodruff.